Have any of you had have you ever had pride get in the way of something? Have you ever had it actually destroy a relationship? You just couldn't admit to something, you couldn't confess something, or your pride made you the focal point and it just overrode the other person. Has it damaged some of your relationships? Have you ever felt insulted? Have you ever insulted someone? What was driving you to do that? What made you just, even this week, maybe not to their face, maybe just talking to someone else, you griped about someone else and you diminished the value of someone else this week? Why did you do it? Have you sort of avoided someone that sort of insulted you and diminished you? And that just has created such a tension for you. Did pride drive you to do something this week that you probably shouldn't have done? Or did pride actually prevent you from doing something this week that you should have done? I mean, I think a lot of times God invites us into something. God calls us to step out in faith, and God calls us to do something. But pride just says, no, I can't risk doing that. And so what we want to do is we want to take a look a little bit more closely at pride over the next number of weeks. Because really what we're going to discover is that pride is at the root of all of our life issues. Pride is really the starting point. It's really what every other dysfunction in our lives is built on at the core. And we want to figure that out. We want to explain that. But it all started because pride is what broke our relationship with God in the first place. And pride is what keeps us from fully surrendering to Him now. I want you to think through. Are you willing to fully bow the knee, fully surrender to the Lordship of Jesus Christ in your life? Or is something stopping you? And what is it that would stop you from doing that? God who created you, God who loves you, who only wants the best for you, and yet there's still something that stops us from fully submitting to God's approach to life, to God's way of doing things. And we say, no, I know better. I have a better way than what God has. Something that works better for me. So really what we're saying is pride is that insidious evil in our lives that everything else is built on. And as we can learn to embrace humility is to the extent that we will experience more freedom in our lives and more peace and more joy. And isn't that really what you want? Isn't really the end result of every decision you make is that I want to have more life. I want to have more peace. I want to have more joy. The problem is our pride gets in there and distorts how you get that and what that means for you. And God actually has a better way. And that's what we want to explore together. So what we want to do is we want to go right back to the very beginning of what the Bible says about who we are and who God created us to be. And I'm going to get you to give me a little bit of input here too. We're going to make this sort of an interactive session this week. But listen to what it says in Genesis 2:7. Then the Lord God formed the man out of the dust from the ground and breathed the breath of life into his nostrils, and man became a living being. Now, what's interesting here is if you read through Genesis 1, you discover that when it came to everything else in creation, God just spoke it into being. God said, let there be plants, let there be stars, let there be animals. But when it came to creating man, he didn't just speak Adam into existence. He actually gets down and gets his hands dirty on this earth that he created. And he takes the earth and the dust of the ground and somehow he shapes it into some semblance of a man. And then he breathes into it the breath of life. And Adam becomes a living being. So you got to understand, first and foremost, Adam was sculpted from dirt. Now here's where I want you to give me some input. What are the implications then for us and who we are if we were created from dirt? Can you think of any? What are the implications for you and who you are if you were created from dirt? Any thoughts? Or is pride going to keep you quiet? We're just a bunch of dirt. Okay? And we'll expand a little bit on that, but any other thoughts? What are the implications if we're just a bunch of dirt? If God sculpted us from the dust of the ground. He just didn't speak us into being. He formed us from the dust of the ground. What? Well, he took time. Yeah. Why? Why didn't he just speak us into being? Why form us from the dirt?
Because he never stops forming us. He takes us from nothing and builds us into something that he wants.
Okay. So God, he likes the artmanship, the craftsmanship, the forming of us. Okay, interesting. Good. Any other thoughts? Let me throw a few of you, first of all, at you. First of all, you are a created being. You're a creation. You are the idea and the impulse of some other being, God, who said, I'm going to create you. You are the result of his intentions. You never existed before. And there is no reason why you should ever exist. But God, out of his wisdom, out of his desire, chose to create you. You are a created being. Secondly, you're created from the dust of the ground. And you got to understand this. There is nothing different about you physically than from anything else on this planet. You are formed from the dust of this planet. You are made up of earth stuff. There's nothing more special about you physically than you and a tree and you and a rock. We're all made from the same carbon and iron and oxygen and hydrogen. And we're all these different atoms that have been blended together into shapes of molecules that have been then shaped into you in a unique configuration. But you're made from the same stuff. There's nothing more special physically about us than anything else on this earth. There's nothing found in you that can't be found in the ground. Listen to what it says in Genesis 3:19. This is the curse. After Adam sinned, God said to him, "You will eat bread by the sweat of your brow until you return to the ground, since you were taken from it, for you are dust, and you will return to dust." See, this is a point that God's emphasizing. This isn't me trying to diminish you and say you're useless. No, God is saying, guys, I made you from dirt. And physically speaking, you're going to return to the ground. You are going to become dust. And that is completely out of your control. Do you remember how at funerals they'll often say, ashes to ashes, dust to dust? It's a biblical phrase. What's kind of interesting here, it's kind of a word play too. The word for ashes in the Hebrew is efer. And the word for dust in Hebrew is afar. Afar, afar. You were afar, and you will become afar. You will become afar. It's like, guys, there's nothing special about our makeup than from the rest of the earth. We are something created. That's why often in the Bible, it talks about how when someone is in mourning, they'll cover themselves with dust and ashes. And really, it's a humbling effect of saying, this is what I came from. This is all I am. And so, God, I come in mourning and acknowledging that my physical life on here is temporal. And that this physical body is going to turn into dust and ash at some point in time again. And God, I am small. In the grand scheme of things, I am small and I am insignificant. And so they would use that as a statement of mourning as they came before God. But the implication here is that you exist by the will of God, and only actually by the will of God. You exist for no other reason other than God had the intention to create you, and as such, he breathed life into you. And this is what makes the difference. This is what separates you apart from any animal, from any tree, from any rock. It's not your physical makeup, because that's all the same stuff. What makes you different is that God, after he formed Adam, he breathed into Adam the breath of life. And what that means is that the life-giving presence of God came into Adam. The Spirit of God came into Adam. And that as the Spirit of God came into Adam, it created Adam into something completely other, something completely different from the rest of creation. It's the presence of God that came into Adam that made all the difference. And it's the presence of God when we allow him into our lives that makes all the difference. And apart from the presence of God, we revert back to just being equal with dust and ashes. So listen to what God said after he formed him in Genesis 1:26. It says, "Then God said, let us make man," and this is going back to repeating the story. God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. They will rule the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and the livestock, the whole earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth." And so what happens is when God created Adam and then Eve, he said, but I've got a significance for you that rises you above everything else in creation. You are going to be a ruler in creation. You are created to be a ruler. That is your original design. And the God said, I want my image to represent me through all of creation. And that's why God said, get married, have children, multiply. Why? Because then his image then gets spread throughout all of creation. And God's representative rule gets represented through you because you are his ruler over earth on his behalf. You are a representative ruler. And you have a significant role because God gave you that significant role. You matter to God. And the role that he has given you and is assigning to you matters to God. One thing to understand, though, about image. For you to be created as an image means you don't exist for you. Isn't that kind of strange? And this is going to be a hard one for us to wrap our heads around. You do not exist for you. You were created by God to be his image. Your existence is all about him. God created this incredible earth, but he then creates a representative of him to be on this earth. And a representative that would be also in relationship with him, that would enjoy him, that would represent his character and his holiness and his goodness and his creativity. But you got to understand, your life is not ultimately about you. In the same sense that I'm losing my voice here. When we talked about gender in the past, we said that your gender is not ultimately about you because God created male and female to be two distinct ways of representing who he is. Thank you. She's a wonderful wife. Your gender is not about you because your gender is image stuff. God created Adam and Eve, male and female, to image him in two distinct different ways. Because sexuality is not about you, it's about him. And who he is, and how he wants to represent himself in this world. And so the fact that you are his image says, guys, you don't exist for you. You exist for God. In Colossians, Paul writes about Jesus. He says, you were created by Jesus, and you are created for Jesus. Apart from being the image of God, apart from being created for God, by God, and given a purpose by God, if we step away from the purpose that God has designed us for, has created for us for, as his image, to represent him and to be in relationship with him, if we step away from that, then who are you? What are you? What significance do you have apart being what God created you to be, doing what God created you to do? You know, it's kind of interesting that he made us both physically and spiritually. Not only did he form us from the dust of the ground, he also breathed life, spiritual life into us. And understand that makes sense, right? If we're to represent God in the physical realm, then it's kind of neat that he created us to be both physical and spiritual. Because we are the bridge between the spiritual realm and the physical realm. As we walk on earth representing God's rule and God's authority and God's intentions, then we are representing the spiritual realm in a physical way. And as a result, we are created to be that bridge in between. And it's kind of cool how God does all this. And so God then gives us his authority. He gives us authority to rule creation. Now, through Adam and Eve, they were given that authority. We've lost that authority when we broke relationship with God. But if you want to get a sense of what that authority looked like, you look to the person of Jesus. Because even though Jesus was God, when Jesus came down to earth, he emptied himself of his divine attributes. Doesn't mean he didn't have them, but he restricted them so that he did not experience them. So what do I mean by that? I mean like God, who is omniscient or is omnipotent, all powerful. Jesus, who is on earth, got weary and got tired. God, who is omniscient, knows everything up in the heavenly realms. Jesus on earth had to learn about life the same way that we had to learn growing up. As an infant, Jesus did not know calculus. As an infant, Jesus didn't speak all languages of the earth. As an infant, Jesus had to be taught how to eat and how to walk. And wow, God, who created the universe, came down and humbled himself to the point where he had to learn how to walk. And not to be crass, but Jesus had to learn how to be potty trained. And there's nothing wrong with that because he chose to enter into humanity and experience everything that us as humans experience, except without sin. And so everything Jesus did on earth, he didn't do because he was God. He is God. But everything he did that you think he did because he was God, he actually didn't do because he's God. He did it because he was showing us what perfect image was supposed to have been doing all along. He was everything Jesus did, calming storms, healing the sick, controlling the evil spirits. Adam and Eve were supposed to have been doing that all along and all their descendants. So what Jesus is showing us is what the authority image was created to have. But then things changed, didn't it? Adam and Eve, they were fully content. They were perfectly fulfilled. They had full joy and peace. There was zero anxiety in Adam and Eve's life. There was none of that. There was zero. Can you imagine a life with zero anxiety, zero fear, but perfect joy and perfect peace every step of the way? It was good. It was good, guys. Until this happened. Satan comes along and he introduces the concept of pride. You know the story. Adam and Eve are in the garden. There's one tree that they're told they're not to eat of, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Adam and Eve, for whatever reason, are choosing to hang out near that tree. And Satan, in the form of a serpent, speaks to Eve from the tree and says, Eve, have you looked at the fruit? Isn't this incredible, awesome fruit? You should eat it. Eve says, oh, no. I can't eat it because God says that in the day that we eat this fruit, we will die. And then listen to what Satan says in Genesis 3, 4-5. He says, no, you will certainly not die. In fact, God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And essentially what Satan is saying to Adam and Eve is, guys, you can be something greater than what God created you to be. And that is really the root of all pride, isn't it? That you can be greater than what you currently are. You can be better. You can be more respected. You can have more control. You can, well, everything. It's kind of interesting that Satan raises this because it's the exact same perspective that he embraced that caused him to rebel from God. Right? Satan had this perspective that as an angel, as this powerful angel, why should he be subject and underneath these human beings that exist, these frail, weak human beings? He is more powerful than them. He should be ruling over them. In fact, he should be ruling right along with God. He's just as good as God. And it's kind of interesting that Satan was able to take this one belief is that we can be something greater. We deserve better. And he convinced 1/3 of all the angels to rebel against God. Why did 1/3 of the angels rebel against God? Because a seed was planted in their minds that says, you deserve better than the role that God created you for, the hierarchy within which God has placed you. You deserve better. And you can be better. So really what his temptation is you right now are missing out on your true potential. You are blind to your ultimate potential. You are something less than what you could be. You can do something to make yourself greater. You can be greater than what God created you to be. You can be actually like God. Are you guys interested in being like God? Are you? I think most of us think, no, I don't want to be God. I'm fine letting God be God. But are you really? Isn't every time you choose to determine what is right or wrong yourself, that you're saying, yeah, I can be like God. I don't need God to tell me what's right and wrong. I can determine what's right and wrong. I can determine what's good and what is evil. That is within my power. In fact, and there are a lot of times, God, I look at how you're doing things and I don't really agree. If I was God, I would have done things differently. Every time you refuse to bow the knee and submit to what God wants to do in and through your life, you're saying, no, God, we're equals. Yes, you can recommend something that you think I should do. Feel free to recommend all you want. But in the end, God, I'm going to decide what I do with my life and the direction I take and how I approach life. God, I'm going to choose that. Because really, God, I'm like you. I'm sort of equal with you on deciding whose direction we follow. Do you see that in yourself? And do I see it in me? Man, am I incredibly arrogant? Am I incredibly proud? Because there are times, guys, when I ignore God. And I don't approach things God's way. And his word, the Bible that he's given us to read as his directions, a lot of times I'm not even that interested in reading it. Yeah, I give or take, Depends on the day. How busy am I? How important is it really to me? Start to see the arrogance in that. God has written a book for you. A book for you to understand everything that you need to know about life. And we went, yeah, maybe I'll get around to it. It's pure arrogance. It's pure pride. but it's at the core of who I am. And what you want to discover is it's going to be at the core of who you are too. So really, if I can be like God, then really what I'm saying is I am God. And when all's said and done, what really matters in this world is not what God wants, it's what I want. Isn't that really how we operate? When all is said and done, you're going to do what you want, because that's what matters most. But this distortion, it has this distortion of who we are. It has two facets to it, and this is where I want you to understand. It's sort of like two sides of the same coin. On one side, it's pride, and on the other side, it's low worth. And we sometimes tend to think that pride and low worth are on a spectrum, that someone who's really proud is over here, and someone that has low worth is over here, and maybe I'm somewhere in the middle, hopefully. Like, yeah, I don't really hate myself, but I'm not really arrogant, proud. I'm in a healthy center. Yeah, no, you're not. I'm not. Because really what pride and low worth are they're two sides of the same coin. They're two ways of talking about the same issue. Let's describe it. Let's talk about low worth first. Low worth is the declaration that you have little or no intrinsic value. Right? See, a 10 out of 10 person would say, hey, I'm important. I have significance. I have meaning. I have value. I am a 10 out of 10. And by the way, that's what God created you to be. Adam and Eve, he created as 10 out of 10s. And for Adam and Eve to say, hey, I'm a 10 out of 10, they wouldn't even say that. But because they don't know anything different, they would just understood, I am who I'm supposed to be, doing what I'm supposed to do, and life is perfect. So low worth is anything that you rate yourself less than a 10 out of 10. Because you're actually diminishing yourself from who God created you to be. God created you as a 10. And guys, in God's perspective, he still values you as a 10. But what we do is we bring in low self-worth. Oh, isn't that interesting? Self-worth. As if you have the authority or the right to determine your value. Isn't that arrogance? I get to put the numerical value of where I'm at. Am I a 3 out of 10? I chose that. Am I a 6 out of 10? I chose that. Am I a -3? I determine my value. I determine my value. It is a self-worth and self-estimate that I've placed on me. For whatever reasons I chose to place that value. I chose it. And with low self-worth or value comes the viewpoint that in some way I am a failure. I'm a failure. I'm broken. I do not measure up. And I do not deserve to be fully loved and accepted. Anyone who's not a 10 out of 10 does not deserve to be fully loved and accepted because they don't measure up. They're a failure in some way. And so this creates some fears in us because what it means is if I do not deserve to be loved and accepted, and yet I desperately crave being loved and accepted, then I must hide myself from you. I have to hide who I really am. And I cannot be vulnerable. I cannot be transparent. I cannot talk about my life. I cannot talk about my struggles. Everything just has to be, okay, everything's good. Because I cannot dare let you see through the facade to see my flaws, because then what would you think of me? And what value would you then place on me? And I need value. And I'm not giving it to myself, and so I'm desperately looking for it from you, but you're not really giving it to me the way I need either, and so I need to hide. Or it causes me to strive to gain your acceptance, to gain your love. Any of you here a people pleaser? what are you doing exactly by being a people pleaser? You are saying, I want to avoid conflict, and I desperately crave everything being peaceful and everyone getting along and people liking me. And so I must approach situations and relationships in such a way that causes you to see the best in me, that causes you to like me. And I'll even bend and I'll change doing what I think is right because, and I won't speak up about how I've been hurt and my feelings. I'll ignore all of that because I need, first and foremost, you to give me a word of acceptance and affirmation. And the other thing it then causes me to do is I'll avoid anything that shows I might fail. Low self-worth says, I cannot risk putting myself out there because if I try something and I fail at it, then what does that say about me and my worth and my value? And I cannot risk that. So I'll pull back. Have any of you ever pulled back from doing something because you feared you wouldn't be good at it? Yeah. Everyone. We've all done that. We all let fear and insecurity control what we do. Let's talk about pride. Pride, Augustine, there's a quote by Augustine on here. He said, pride is the love of one's own excellence. Yeah, I'm choosing not to see my flaws. I've totally buried them down. I'm totally oblivious to my flaws because that's a little bit too painful. So I'm going to ignore my flaws and I'm just going to revel in my excellence. Man, have you ever done that with others? You've seen their flaws and you point them out, but you haven't talked quite so much about your own flaws? This week, you probably found it easy to find that someone messed up in some way, and you then thought negative thoughts about them and who they were. But then you just as quickly think about all the times that you messed up. Well, no, I can't think about that. Pride says, I must be at the top. Pride is really a sense of significance achieved through accomplishment and words of affirmation. Pride is a sense of significance achieved through accomplishment and words of affirmation. And what those do, when I accomplish something and when I do it well, I can feel good about me because why? I measure up. I did that. I performed that. I was successful. I measure up. I am successful. And because I've measured up, I am worthy and I deserve a certain degree of love and respect. Is that how we think? When you measure up, aren't you excited to share that with someone else? How come? Why do we do that? Why, when we accomplish something, we're like putting certificates up on the wall? I graduated, or hey, I got the medals, and we hang the medals up, or we share things like when we accomplish something, we love to share it. Why? Because part of us is hoping that people will see our accomplishments, and as a result, they will see that we have value and worth, and they will affirm us. And I can feel good about myself. But you know what? Pride has the dirty underside. Really what pride says is, my significance, do you know where it ultimately comes from? My significance comes from me. I measured up. I was successful. I did things right. It's me. I did it. And my significance comes from me and my performance. And it doesn't come from God. It doesn't come from what God says about me and what God calls me to be and do. And as a result, because my significance comes from my performance, guess what I fear? I fear failure. I fear people that will not affirm me or respect me. Have you ever had someone confront you about an issue in your life? And what was your initial reaction? When someone wanted to talk to you about something unhealthy in your approach to relationships, or something unhealthy about your approach to work, something unhealthy period, about what you're doing, and someone wanted to talk to you in a loving way, even perhaps, and they raise an issue with you, and what is your defense? Oh, we react. Defenses kick in. Anger arises. Excuses come quickly. Justification. We do it because we fear that our failure will say that I'm unworthy of love and respect, and I must continually prove myself. Pride is exhausting because no matter how much you prove yourself once, you have to keep doing it over and over again. So guys, it's all rooted in the same fear. The fear is that I am nothing, that I am nobody, and that I don't matter. And it will take one of two faces. Either it's going to take low self-esteem or it's going to take a perspective of arrogance. But both of them are statements of pride rooted in low self-worth. And we fear that we are not worthy and deserving of love. We are fearful that we don't have value. And yet we long for it. We long for it, and so we reach out to it. And so in my low self-worth, at times I pull back. And why am I pulling back? It's really pride, because I don't want you to see the flaws in me. I want you to see me as being something better than what I think I really am. Pride, low self-worth, the exact same thing. The most proud people are the most insecure people. Have you discovered that? The most arrogant people are the most insecure people. When I was in junior high, there was a junior high bully on the school grounds. I've shared that before with some of you. And the junior high bully would go around and he would be pushing people against the wall. And he had a cadre of people behind him that would back him up. But he was the force. People followed him. People listened to him, whether out of respect or out of fear. But he had control on that junior high playground. And yet he was also the most insecure person. He didn't do well academically. He couldn't validate himself through grades. So he strove for respect and significance by being the tough guy, by striking fear into others. He and I were sitting in study hall. And it was a very relaxed study class. And we had nothing to do. And so I was sitting around him. He and I started playing the game of Knuckles. Do you know the game of Knuckles? Got to pull it? Well, he's a big guy. He's a strong guy. But he was slow. And so I was fairly fast. And so we played Knuckles, and I just go, rap it. His hand turned red. It was sore, and he gave up. And guess how I felt? I felt significant because I beat the bully at a physical game of violence. Pure pride, wasn't it? Pure pride. But how many of you resonated with it? Yes, he beat the bully. Because that's your pride speaking too. You want to beat the bullies that you've experienced in your life. You want to win. You want to conquer. You want to come out on top. And that resonates with all of us. Because ultimately, it's all about me. I don't care about him. I care about me being validated. As long as I can even beat him through a game of Knuckles, I am a winner. As stupid and as meaningless as that all that was. The only thing that mattered was, I'm somebody. To the point where I remember that story and I can share it with you today. Isn't that crazy? How flawed and arrogant and prideful I am? Yeah. You can start looking for a new pastor. An insecure person cannot step out and serve someone else because they're constantly worrying about how they'll be perceived. A proud person will not humbly serve someone else because they're concerned about how they'll be perceived. Or if a proud person does serve someone else, it's still rooted in the fact of, oh, I was able to help that person. And it still feeds our ego and our pride in some way. What pride does is it sets us up for comparison. Either we compare ourselves with others well, and we fall on the side of pride, or we compare ourselves with others, and we fail, and we err on the side of low worth, that I'm not as valuable, I'm not as lovable. But see, it all comes down to this comparison. Who are you in comparison to someone else? Listen to Luke 18. The Pharisee, for those of you who don't know, was a religious ruler who prided himself on the fact that he kept the law, the Old Testament law, to the nth degree. In fact, not only did they keep the Old Testament laws, the Pharisees built a whole bunch of buffer laws that protected them from breaking the Old Testament laws. And so the Old Testament law might say, hey, don't work on the Sabbath. Well, the Pharisees would come along and say, oh, well, that means you can only walk 2 kilometers. And you can't walk any more than 2 kilometers on the Sabbath, because then that's excessive. And the Bible never said you couldn't walk more than 2 kilometers. The Pharisees said you couldn't walk more than 2 kilometers, right? But then even then they'd find a way around it, saying, well, what we'll do is at that 2 kilometer mark, we'll make sure that there's a little basket arranged that has a little bit of wine and cheese and bread. And we'll sit down and we'll eat. And once you eat together, then you can do another 2 kilometers. It's ridiculous, right? But a Pharisee is someone who said, I want to hold strictly to the law of God so that I can validate myself, that I can be declared righteous by my efforts. So this is what a Pharisee was doing. He was standing and praying like this about himself. God, I thank you that I'm not like other people. I'm not like the greedy, the unrighteous, the adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of everything I get. This is how the tax collector's praying. And what's he ultimately doing? What's he saying to God? I am worthy. I have made myself righteous enough to be affirmed and accepted by you. I have made myself righteous. I am good enough for you, God. Meanwhile, the tax collector standing far off would not even raise his eyes to heaven, but kept striking his chest and saying, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And Jesus said, I tell you, this one, the tax collector, went down to his house justified rather than the self-righteous Pharisee. Because everyone who exalts himself by his own efforts will be humbled. But the one who humbles himself will be exalted. And what pride does is it distorts our view of our perspective of life. And actually distorts our life. And ultimately, what it's doing is it is going to distort your view of God. It has to. Your pride or your low worth is going to distort your view of God. Here's what it's going to say about God. This is the understanding Adam and Eve had to come to about God before they ate the apple. This all happened very quickly. They weren't thinking about it. It wasn't conscious, but subconsciously, here's the things they had to say about God. Is God fearful? Is God afraid that I might eat this fruit? Is God worried that I might become like him in power and independence? Is God worried about that? Is that why God told me not to eat the fruit? Because I would become like him, and God doesn't want me becoming like him. God's selfish in that way. And what it was ultimately saying, Adam and Eve then had to come to the conclusion, God does not ultimately love me. Because if God loved me, he would want the best for me. But God isn't giving me his best. God is keeping me from what is best. He's restricting me from it. And so I don't think God actually loves me fully. And then thirdly, I ultimately have to say, well, then God is not even good. If God in his selfishness is just keeping knowledge of good and evil to himself and is not sharing it with others, then God, he can't be trusted. He's not a good God. And in fact, and if God is all these things that I've just now assessed that he must be, then that means I have to look out for myself first and foremost. I can actually be better than what God says I can be by doing things His way. I can have better life than doing it God's way. I can have better life by taking the controls and doing what I think I need to do. I can make myself better than what God made me to be. And so I must take control. I must decide what's right and wrong. I must rule my own life. Instead of being God's image, His representative ruler, I need to become the ruler. I will choose. I will make decisions myself, and I will rule my life. Because that is how I will get the best life. And I need to distrust God from this point forward. I can't trust that when God says something, He actually has my best interest in mind. And He should have my best interest in mind. Why? Because ultimately I'm God. God should serve me. And if God's not going to serve me, then forget God. I want nothing to do with Him. Do you realize that every sinful thought that you embrace, every sinful action you do, you've said all of these things? Is that depressing? Or what? Apart from God, everything's distorted. Every action I do is rooted in pride and therefore it's sin. Listen to what Paul said in Romans 14:23. He said, everything that is not from faith is sin. What does that mean? Everything that you do that is not rooted in an understanding of who God is and what He wants to do in and through you and in submission to Him and bringing glory to Him, anything you do that's not centered in that, even if it has the appearance of being good, it's sin. Wow. My life has been completely corrupted by pride. And all of us as descendants of Adam and Eve, that's our story. You are driven by your pride in the same way that I've been driven by my pride. If you have low self-esteem, understand that's just another version of pride. But you can change this. Listen to what God says in 2 Chronicles 7:14. And He's talking futuristically to the Israel people who at some point in time down the road were going to rebel against God to such a degree that God was going to send them into exile into us as slaves into a foreign nation, and because they messed up so badly, because they rejected Him so badly. But God is saying even to those people in exile that have turned against Him, He says to His Israelite people, He says, if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. Now, this was a promise to the Israel nation, but I believe it is also how God wants to interact with each of you. No matter how much you have messed up, how much you've rebelled, how much you've determined the course of your life apart from God, and maybe you've gotten to a point where there's a lot of regrets and a lot of hurts, and you feel like a failure, and you feel unworthy, and you feel like you've been abandoned by God. God at that moment wants to speak to you saying, yeah, but if you will turn back to me, if you will humble yourself, in other words, saying, God, I'm nothing apart from you. God, I was created by you and for you, and I've been anything but. And God, I bow my knee to you, and I seek you. I seek your face. I just want relationship with you. I want to be restored to you. I want to know you. And God, I am going to turn away from all this rebellious, wicked approach to life that I've been embracing. God, I'm going to turn away from me doing it my way with my rationale. I'm going to turn away from it, and I'm going to turn to you. Then He says, He will hear from heaven. He will forgive your sins, and He'll bring healing. He'll restore life, joy, and peace. If you will humble yourself and let go of low worth and arrogance. Listen to what Peter said in 1 Peter 5:6. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you at the proper time, and cast all your cares on him. Why? He cares about you. He really, really cares about you. And the only thing that is keeping him from you right now is your pride and my pride. Micah 6:8. Mankind, he has told each of you what is good and what it is the Lord requires of you: to act justly, to love faithfulness, and to walk humbly with your God. I encourage you to start identifying, where is pride at work in your life? Where have you been resisting God? Where have you been doing it your way as opposed to God's way? When has pride been holding you back from doing something you should do? And when has pride driven you to do something you shouldn't be doing?